Saying that every Land Rover is unreliable is like saying every Kardashian is attractive. Or like saying every Nickelback song is bad. Or like saying every McDonald's ice cream machine is broken. It simply is not true, or at least a vast overgeneralization. Okay, except for the McDonald's ice cream machine part, those are definitely all broken. Look, I know this video is probably not going to be very popular, and it's probably going to make a lot of you really upset because this is a video that's challenging preconceptions. And also supporting some preconceptions because some of, the general zeitgeist around Land Rovers is true, but let's get right into it. Reliability is a super hard thing to measure. Now, of course, you have anecdotal evidence. My neighbor had a Land Rover and it blew up 300 times, and I get that comment a lot. Then, of course, you have the big companies that measure reliability for a living, like J.D. Power and Consumer Reports, and they do a great job, but really, that's just a snapshot of reliability over a set period. Now, obviously, I am not smarter than J.D. Power or Consumer Reports, but we have owned 7 of these in the last 5 years. We've driven them tens of thousands of miles. And before doing this video, I spoke to some mechanics and some experts about the matter, and we're gonna have an independent, honest talk about reliability and find out if it's really, really, really as bad as all the comments say it is. Land Rover was founded all the way back in 1948, and one of the guys critical to the founding of the company was a dude named Maurice Wilkes, who took inspiration, a lot of inspiration, from the Willys Jeep and essentially built his own version. Now, it was made out of aluminum due to war shortages. It was painted in pretty dull colors, once again due to surplus paint they had, but it was a go anywhere, do anything, super basic 4-wheel drive vehicle. Now, were these old series Land Rovers unreliable? I mean, it depends a little bit who you ask, but if you ask me, no, because essentially they were tractors. They were really basic utilitarian transportation that just didn't have a lot to fail. They had little tiny 4-cylinder gas or diesel engines, and these were the Land Rovers that established themselves across continents, not just countries, like throughout the African continent. Then came the late 1960s, and Land Rover became part of a larger parent organization called British Leyland, which was a complete dumpster fire. It comprised of over 15 brands, 250,000 employees, and throughout the late 60s and 1970s, British Leyland had more strikes than Amazon during the holidays. They had worse leadership problems than Boeing, and they had more reliability concerns than a toddler building a stadium out of off-brand Legos.
Austin, MG, Triumph, Mini, Jaguar, Daimler, Princess, Morris, Rover, all with super cover. Great cars and a great deal more.
All of this is to say that Land Rover's reliability, at least in my opinion, during this era, tanked. And look, a lot of it was down to a lack of money for product development and total and utter complete mismanagement. It was really, really bad. Eventually, British Leyland was disbanded. Land Rover ended up under the ownership of British Aerospace, which is kind of funky, and it kind of just floundered as a brand throughout much of the 80s and early 90s. Ultimately, by the mid-1990s, Land Rover ended up under BMW ownership, where the products improved immensely, if not the reliability. Starting in the early 2000s, Land Rover ended up under the ownership of Ford, and then things started improving, and improving dramatically. Now, this is the part of the video that everybody is going to disagree with. There is, in fact, a reliable Land Rover. Actually, 2 if you count the Range Rover Sport. This is the Land Rover LR3, sold for model years 2005 through 2009. We've owned 2 of these. I've driven these tens of thousands of miles, and most mechanics will tell you this is the best Land Rover ever made. Here's why. The Land Rover LR3, or if you're abroad, the Discovery 3, and this car's sister vehicle, the Range Rover Sport, were, in my opinion, peak Ford era of Land Rover. The era when Ford went in, really solved a lot of quality problems and construction problems, but still let the engineers do their thing. Now, there are certain components of this vehicle shared with Ford, like this 4-liter V6, which is basically straight out of a Ford Explorer, which is good because those engines are known for lasting a long time. But the rest of the car is completely Land Rover. This really innovative part body on frame, part unibody construction. The 4-corner air suspension, the interior is all Land Rover. And speaking of all Land Rover, most of these LR3s didn't have the Ford engine. They had an engine called the AJ V8, the Aston Jaguar V8, once again, largely developed under Ford. It was a 4.4-liter V8 that is just about indestructible. I know, I talked to some mechanics to get their perspective, and 4.4 V8s, if properly maintained, and that's not to say rebuilt, just maintained, will easily last well over 200 or 250,000 miles before rebuilds. They're that good. Now for the suspension talk, because a ton of people online like to point out that the 4-corner air suspension on Land Rovers are terrible and awful and will bankrupt you. Well, here's been my experience. We've owned 2 LR3s, both with original airbags running between 18 and 20 years old now. Pretty crazy, right? And no problems, no failures, no stranding on the trail. These are very basic air suspension setups that are easy to replace and pretty affordable. A couple of airbags may only run you a few $100s on a rebuilt website, which is actually pretty reasonable considering the ride quality it delivers. So these are not as problematic as people make you believe they are. God, these cars are just the best. The LR3 and the Range Rover Sport are the ultimate chameleons. And what I mean by that is they can blend into any situation ever better than any car ever made. You need to show up to a fancy dinner at a fancy hotel, the LR3 or Range Rover Sport will do it perfectly. You need to take your kids to school, you can get these with 7 seats and they have a ton of space for the soccer team. You want to go hit a level 7 or 8 Onyx off-road rated trail, you jack up the air suspension, they can get these with a rear locker and it will do it. You want to take a 1,000-mile road trip in absolute comfort, you can do it. These things will drive past anything except maybe a gas station like it's nothing. These are just awesome, comfortable, reliable, and livable daily driver slash off-roader slash impress people cars. They're just the best. Now, it wouldn't be a balanced review without talking about some failure points on the LR3. We talked about the suspension and the airbags and how robust they are. Air compressors, however, can fail. It's not a very expensive part, it's not very difficult to replace, but it's something worth noting. Some LR3 and Range Rover Sport, for that matter, do suffer from premature transmission failures, which seem to happen more on cars from 2005 than 06 through 09, which is why I recommend 06 through 09. But apart from that, maybe some little electronic things here, maybe a couple of leaking sunroofs every now and then, these cars are reliable. Believe it or not, are they going to be Toyota reliable? Probably not, but I see a ton of these listed online with over 250 or 260,000 miles. It's not a million, of course, but for any fairly modern car, that's pretty darn good. I genuinely adore this Land Rover, and for the $5,000 I spent on it in the past 15,000 miles of trouble-free motoring, it has been the single best car I've ever owned, without a doubt. Now you're probably thinking, this guy is full of it, right? It can't be that good. Well, go try one for yourself. Not to say all Land Rovers are this good, though. For example, the P38 Range Rover. This is a car that's pretty. You are going to need to bleep there, Mary, so bleep it, but it is awful, hoe bag, dirt bag, dirty bad.
Done?
That's a lot of bleeps, people. Mary, a Land Rover is quite like a town drunk, where it will run worse for longer than any other healthy person in the town. You ever notice how in the movies the town drunks never actually die? It's because they're indestructible. Yeah, it may have a check engine light and an ABS light and a brake warning and an airbag fault and a fuse 10 fault.
And the tires were both
flat. This is the town drunk, but he's always gonna be there, cracking jokes and puking all over the place. All right, that may have been a little bit of an over-exaggeration for comedic effect, but yes, generally speaking, P38 Range Rovers, like this one behind me, have fundamental design flaws that make them unreliable in the long run. So let's get into it. Oh yes, behind the wheel of Her Majesty's worst, maybe? That's a little harsh, but there are genuinely concrete, describable problems as to why this Range Rover is bad. Oh God, the hood latch is broken. How does that happen? This car's so unreliable, it won't even let you fix it. This generation of Land Rover and Range Rover, and by this generation I mean the 1970s and the 1980s and the 1990s and the 2000s. Okay, pretty much every Land Rover Range Rover with a V8 produced from the 70s through 2004 used an engine called the Rover V8, which actually started life as an all-aluminum Buick engine from the early 1960s. So when this car came out in, the mid-90s, it was already 30 years old. Not to say they didn't change it, because they did. Now, this Rover V8 started out as a great engine, a little 3.5-liter unit that was compact, lightweight, and made good power. The problem is that by the time you got to the late 90s and early 2000s, Land Rover Range Rover kept boring it out. The cylinder walls got thinner and thinner, and the overheating problems got worse and worse. These engines were known for overheating, especially like 2003, 2004 Discovery 2s. And when they overheat, they have a tendency to blow their head gaskets. And eventually the steel cylinder liners that the pistons move up and down in start slipping around themselves. And then you just end up with a dance party where everybody is sad because it means you need a new engine, or at least a new head essentially. These are fundamental design flaws that I know some people in the UK probably don't want to hear about, but a lot of problems happened when they bored these things out to about 4 liters, or especially the 4.6 liter versions, that caused them to be unreliable. And couple that with a temperature gauge that simply lies to you saying everything is okay until the engine has gone full Chernobyl, means that it's really hard to keep an eye on things with these engines. And yet, even though I just spent the last 5 minutes taking the biggest old dump on this car, I still love them, and many people do. And if you maintain them, they will keep going. There are still thousands of Range Rovers of this era left on the road. Keeping these cars on the road is a labor of love, which is why I call this generation the love models. Oh, that's awful. I'm not going to call them the love models ever again, but what I'm trying to get at is these cars require more than just general maintenance. There will be failures, and there will be frustration, and there will be headaches, but there are still tons of fans out there for these old school Land Rovers and Range Rovers that love them and keep them on the road and want to see them stay running. And for those of you out there, I commend you. Now let's talk about some more of these cars that take the passion and the love of the brand to keep these vehicles on the road. I would consider pretty much any Land Rover or Range Rover with a solid axle to fall within this category. I'm talking the old Range Rover Classics. I'm talking the Discovery 1 and the Discovery 2 and the P38 Range Rover. But the thing is, these cars can be kept on the road because they are actually fairly simple to work on. They don't have a ton of electronics. They have basic suspension components, apart from the air suspension on some of them, and they're really, actually, pretty strong platforms if you're willing to put in the time. It's removable, Mary. See, like it's on there good now. Ignore all the warnings on this car. Like I said, you gotta love these in some instances to keep them on the road. And that's the thing. These cars are possible to keep on the road for a relatively reasonable amount of money if you do the work yourselves and if you love them. But there are several Land Rovers that are so bad that even I won't touch them. These are cars that are not just for fanatics, they are people that are a little wacko, a little weird, or a little bit unlucky. Let's talk about the really bad ones. Now, I am weird. Not much of a statement, as everybody knows that already. And I do like several unreliable cars that have objective failure points, but not these ones, because their failure points are so egregious, it's just simply not worth it. Let's talk Freelander. Now, the Freelander was Land Rover's first attempt at a more down-market, everyman unibody crossover. The design was great, the capability was okay for what it was, but the timing belt was designed by Satan himself, located at the backside of the engine. And the transmission was made out of wet noodles or paper or sticks or twigs. I don't know what they built Freelander transmissions out of, but I have never seen one post 2010 that still has all the gears. They're awful. They're so bad, and they're so expensive to put right for an experience that really wasn't that much worth it. And then we come to the Range Rover L322, which early ones were an uphill battle. Huh? See what I did there? Pretty good. Thanks, Mary. I totally stole that from you. The L322 Range Rover in the early cars were powered by a BMW V8, which was once again fundamentally flawed and very expensive to put right, with major oil burning issues. And then we come to the air suspension on those early cars, which was also pretty crap. Same with the electronics. Now, the later ones, 2009 and later, were actually pretty good. But early L322s are just one of the Land Rovers I would stay away from. Now, what about the newer Land Rovers? Well, Land Rover was purchased by Tata in 2008, and certainly some of the first cars that Tata manufactured with Land Rover were problematic, like the LR4 had some pretty big timing chain issues, but to be honest with you, some of the latest stuff seems to be really good, like this Land Rover Defender, which has been out now for about 4 years or so, and folks generally seem very pleased with the reliability. With the latest generation of engines and transmissions and infotainment, they're doing pretty good. Let's talk about the Defender, the car we are driving right now, and the car that we quite famously owned 3 of due to some problems. The first one had a check engine light that was unsolvable at the time. The second one that they gave us had an issue where the wiring harness was cut. And then the third one ended up with 2 flat tires on a trail, and a very grumpy me will include that footage now. Tires are aired back up to avoid any sidewall deflection now, actually. I'm not going to enjoy the rest of my trip. I'm going to say that right now. Oh, and I don't have any grip now. G'day! Different spot, I took a different line on it. Same exact thing happened. So the Defender's wide, right? I couldn't go around this side. You came at it like this, hit the pinch the sidewall here. I came at it straight on, hit it right here, tire like this, and the sidewall gave out again.
Wow.
Ultimately, these videos went very viral, and a lot of people use them as an example as to why the new Land Rover Defender is unreliable. Now, were these problems the fault of Land Rover? Well, certainly the first one did have that check engine light, which was the manufacturer's fault. But the second one went out of commission because the dealer cut through the wiring harness. And the third one went out of commission only because I was an idiot and popped 2 tires on one trail. But to say that those vehicles, failed all because of Land Rover's fault is not fair. The track record for this Defender has been genuinely very good from a lot of owners I've talked to. Either the 3-liter inline-6 or this 2-liter turbo seem to be holding up pretty well. And then you've got that epic V8, which is a super cool engine as well, but people seem really satisfied with their Defenders. So is it worth it buying a Land Rover over something like a Toyota? Well, I'm sure this is where all the keyboard commandos are going to head to the comment section. But here's the deal, right? Toyota's always near or at the top of all the JD Power and Consumer Reports lists, and everybody has success stories with Toyota. But if you want something that's truly unique, that's not like what everyone else drives, and that's a very exciting experience, then in my mind it is. Land Rovers, at least to me, have soul, they have character, and more importantly, they have experience. Driving a Land Rover always makes me immensely happy because it feels like an occasion. It feels like I'm going out on safari. It feels more special than any other regular car you can buy outside of like a supercar like a Lamborghini or Ferrari. They just have a spirit to them. And Land Rover people are kind of the ultimate car guys because through it all, through thick and thin, they stick by their vehicles and they keep them going. You see, my experience with Land Rovers has been actually very, very positive. In the 7 we've owned, they've all been really good to me. And I know they can be bad, kind of like a puppy. They may pee on the carpet every now and then, but I have just come to love them. And it's one of those things that you either completely understand or absolutely don't. And I know most people, at least watching this video, will probably be in that camp of I absolutely don't. But if you can put up with some of the niggles, you're really going to enjoy the car. It has been truly one of my favorite parts of the automotive world is being into Land Rovers. It really isn't that bad. Much like Nickelback, I'm through with standing in line and clubs will never get it. It's like the bottom of the ninth and I'm never gonna win. This life hasn't turned out quite the way I want it to be. Tell me what you want. Wow, I'm a tiger. I meant to say Eye of the Tiger. Do you think Bon Jovi wrote that song or was that Foreigner? I like a good log. There are some God, no, my phone is ringing. I don't know who that is. Love model. Cool.